All right, so everyone, thank you for coming to week 3. We are on our third topic, our second topic in this course, which is self-management. Last week we went over self-awareness. So we're looking and we're following basically 4 main domains that make up emotional intelligence. So we're on domain number 2, which is self-management. For our emotional check-in today, for this week's emotional check-in, I want you to think about a moment, any moment really, to reflect on impulses versus intention. And I'll break that down for you now. So I want you to think of a recent time when you reacted emotionally. To make it simple, obviously something that maybe was a negative incident, something maybe you snapped at someone, maybe you avoided a task, maybe you procrastinated or you shut down. What was the situation? And so I was thinking about this for myself. I received critical feedback on a paper. And I worked really, really hard on it. And it wasn't that it was denied. It was, well, that's happened too. But, you get that email and you're like, I had an emotional reaction. Let's just put it that way. So what I want you to think about when you identify your moment, and I'll give you a minute to think as well after I explain this, is I want you to think about what your impulse was in that moment. And then we want to separate that from what your intention would have been had you been able to stop and pause first, right? So my impulse when I got the feedback from the publisher was I closed the email. I felt defeated. What am I doing with my life and my career? I avoided even addressing any of the comments for several days. Well, it's probably more like weeks, but we'll simplify it to days. But had I taken a moment to kind of round up my emotions, intervene before I had that reaction emotionally, thus I put off the work. My intention would have been just to take a deep breath, read the feedback fully, and make a plan to revise it without kind of spiraling further into out of control with it. So I want you to just think for a minute, what would be your moment? Obviously, we're thinking about negative moments where you had an impulsive reaction, and breaking down what your intentional reaction would have been had you stopped and thought and intervened. And obviously this fits well into self-management, which we're talking about today. So go ahead and take a second to think about that for yourselves. You're welcome to share in the chat. I'll open the floor in a second if anybody wants to share verbally, no pressure to, but go ahead and take a moment to think about that. So Jessica shared in the chat, I tend to have the most with criticism as well. So I like that you use that word because this term feedback versus criticism, right? What's the difference? It's kind of in how you interpret it. Not all the time. Sometimes people are just criticizing you. It's not healthy feedback. We're going to see the term feedback, though, surface actually throughout the course because how you receive that, how you give it has a huge role also in emotional intelligence. Thank you for sharing that, Jessica. Just opening the floor. Anybody have an experience they want to share? No pressure. Give you a second to decide. So typically when we're thinking of these moments, they're not necessarily the best moments about us. So of course, maybe most of us don't want to share them. So what we want to talk about, or what we're getting to ultimately with today's work, is that gap between impulse and intention. And that's where self-management, our domain today, actually lives. So today we're going to learn what helps us kind of close that gap and regulate our emotions and our actions more effectively. So last week, again, here's our Goleman framework. We've got 4 main domains. You can tell I've been building course shells and saying modules. 4 main domains under domains theory. Self-awareness, which was understanding your own emotions, your own triggers, your emotional tendencies. That's what we've done last week. That one is foundational to self-management. So we'll need to go.
I'll take it though.
There you go. Let me mute that person. So if you missed that video, make sure you circle back to it because and you're intentional about growing your emotional intelligence, you really need to go back to self-awareness. Make sure you're all clued in there. So last week we focused on self-awareness, understanding your emotions and your triggers. And this week today we're discussing self-management, which follows self-awareness because they kind of work in tandem. And I'm going to say something I think I said 15 times last week, but you can't manage what you don't understand. Self-awareness is where we find understanding. Self-management is where you find self-management. So our goal with self-management is to learn how to regulate emotions, remain adaptable, and act intentionally under emotional pressure. So this is the ability to regulate one's emotions, your thoughts, your behavior in ways that align with your goals, your values, your responsibilities, especially in stressful or challenging situations. So I don't think many of us are figuring out, well, how do I manage how happy I am? I'm just too happy. It's like hurting me, right? I think most of us are zeroing in on maybe some of those negative, challenging situations, those negative emotions while we're thinking through this class. But it involves, self-management involves maintaining control, focus, especially when emotions are running high. And basically, it entails regulating internal experiences in order to respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. So in order to respond intentionally rather than impulsively. And this is an ability that forms like a core component of emotional intelligence as a practical skill, right? So why is this a key feature of EI? It's really about noticing what you're feeling in the moment. Well, self-awareness, let me clarify that. Self-awareness is about noticing what you're feeling in a moment. Self-management is about what you do with that awareness. So you can't always control your initial emotional reaction, right? But you can choose your response. And that choice is very powerful. Self-management is really the first way people experience you, right? They don't always see self-awareness. They don't always see the internal turmoil, the internal response. Self-management is where you now bring it outside, and that's how people are viewing you, right? How they're experiencing you. So obviously self-management is going to influence your relationships. It's going to influence your performance, your well-being as a person. It's basically, like I said, what others are experiencing from you in real time. Whether you stay calm under pressure, whether you adapt to change or take initiative, all of that reflects how well you manage yourself. And all of that impacts how others experience you and how they see you. I highlighted this last week with self-awareness. We're going to circle back to it again, that even self-management, just like self-awareness, it's a skill, not a trait. So it's something you can learn. It's something you can practice. Just like any other ability, it's something you can improve on. So this means no matter where you're starting from, you have the power to grow and get better at managing your emotions and managing those responses. So one thing I love is that Goleman, with all his domains, has those little skill areas that kind of break it down for us in a pithy way. So he identifies 5 key skills that support effective self-management. So these skills are going to enable you to remain goal-focused, resilient, productive, and in healthy relationships. Now, last week, you had the opportunity to choose from, like, what do we have here? 8 different assessments. I don't know how many you actually took. I haven't gone in yet to see. Or maybe you just took one, right? So maybe you'll circle back to the rest when we're done. And again, I had so many assessments available because they all dealt with different topics, and all of those topics are seemingly addressed today. Now, we're not going to get to be really in depth in any one of these. I will talk about all of them. I'm pretty sure I'm talking about all of them. I think a lot of them, depending on what assessment you took. So if you'll take a minute to think back or look at this list and identify which one it is you took, I think you'll be able to make pretty strong correlations between that assessment and what your results were and the content today. Now I'm going to address some of these as we go, but as a quick note, if you look at what's in orange, I basically abbreviated all of them. And as we go through, as I'm talking about one of those 5 skills, because that's what we're going to go over next, I have put in the corner which assessments most strongly correlate with that skill. So and then I'll kind of break down what the assessment was doing and how it relates to that. And then at the end, we're going to circle back to these because I got a whole cheat sheet for you on what do you do now that you took that assessment? How do I put that in action? So we're going to start with skill number 1, emotional self-control. Notice how on the right-hand side, bottom right, I've got the 3 assessments that related to this. And, let me put that in the chat too. That way, if you're like, I already forgot what the acronym for the one was I took, let me get that opened up real quick. I think I even have them linked to the assessment, so that might help. There you go. I just copied and pasted from another document I had. So anyways, excuse me. The first skill of self-management is emotional self-control. That's probably a no-brainer for many of us. So this is the ability to manage disruptive emotions and those disruptive impulses, especially in challenging situations, because that's usually when they're the most disruptive, right? So staying calm, staying composed, staying under control, avoiding impulsive reactions, especially things that are going to make a tough situation even worse. And if you're like me, you have plenty of memories where you're like, the way I handled that made this go downhill even further. So at this stage, this skill is about choosing not to let anger, anxiety, frustration, burnout, the feeling of being overwhelmed, hijack your behavior, and instead staying clear-headed and staying positive. So you remember positivity was something we talked about last week, that positive affect versus that negative affect. A lot of us tend to fall into that negative affect, especially when our emotions are running really high. So this stage, emotional self-control absolutely does not mean ignoring how you feel. It means being able to experience those feelings without letting them drive your actions, especially in a way that you might regret later. So example of high emotional self-control would be like a colleague misses a deadline, right? And you're relying on that colleague to do said item, and you feel frustrated about it, right? But you calmly discuss solutions instead of going straight into criticism and blaming, right? We want to be productive with our self-management. Low emotional self-control, they miss the deadline. You immediately lash out, you express anger in front of the team, and then hopefully you're coming back later to say sorry and HR isn't getting involved, right? So those would be some differences in between how we might see self-control in a moment in the workplace. So those that took the ERQ, the emotional regulation questionnaire, this one looked at how you manage your emotions. So whether you tend to rethink situations to change how you feel, and that was called cognitive reappraisal. We've talked about this idea of reappraisal. I kind of equate it with this idea of re-narrating, right? Changing how we view the story or the perspective we have on the story. So it was looking at how you feel, whether or not you rethink situations to change how you feel. So cognitive reappraisal, or if you suppress your emotions altogether, which they called expressive suppression. So if you were higher in cognitive reappraisal, that's what your score results said, then you were more likely in control of your emotional response. You had more impulse control. You were able to, I guess, well, let me think of an example. So you feel frustrated in a meeting, but you reframe the situation as a learning opportunity rather than a personal attack. So you would be someone who responds very thoughtfully instead of snapping, right? So on the other hand, if you took that assessment, someone who scored more in the expressive suppression, this person potentially have like really maladaptive behavior. So where you might have like short-term control, but you have less effective long-term control on your emotion. So you feel angry, but you don't show it. And maybe you can keep working, you're angry at that colleague, maybe you're not showing it, right? And you keep working effectively, but your stress level remains super high from that experience, like long-term, all day, maybe even the next couple days, and that relationship may suffer. So that's how that one's going to relate to this emotional self-control skill. If you took the difficulties in emotional regulation scale, this one was looking at areas where you might struggle to manage your emotions. So the scale looked at things like difficulty controlling impulses when you're upset, trouble focusing on goals when emotional. We're going to see goals as another skill essentially in this later. Not able to clarify how you're feeling. So showing some low self-awareness, right? And then also a problem with accepting your emotions. So remember, self-confidence was a key thing under self-awareness, knowing your strengths and knowing your weaknesses. So if you were low on this DERS scale, if you had a low score, this kind of scale, they score differently, right? you have good emotional self-control. You're staying calm under stress, under pressure, you're able to focus, you remain like very thoughtful in challenging situations. But if you, scored high on the scale, then you had more difficulty regulating your emotions. Talking about that positive and negative affect scale, I abbreviated it as PANAS. I don't know how you would say that word. So if you're someone who scores higher in positive affect, you're better able to maintain control of a positive emotional state, which supports emotional self-control, right? If you had a negative affect, if you had a tendency to that negative affect, then you're probably someone who might experience more frequent negative emotions when you, which is going to make emotional self-control very difficult for you, right? Very challenging for you. I'm just keeping an eye on the chat over here. Some of you are giving feedback on the scales you took, so that's awesome. So emotional self-control, just to rehash, your ability to manage, disrupt emotions, well, manage emotions, but also disrupt impulses, right? Disrupt those impulses and also not let the emotions run you over internally, even if externally you're holding it together. So our second skill, probably one that most people wouldn't equate with this stage or this even emotional intelligence in general, but this is transparency. We can call it being trustworthiness. And this is about maintaining integrity and ethical behavior consistently. And I would say the key word is consistently, right? So when you're transparent, you act in alignment with your values. Others see you as dependable and principled. And there's consistency between what you say and what you do. So for example, imagine a team member admits when they've made a mistake instead of hiding it, right? So that's transparency. The honesty builds trust. It shows authentic, like them being authentic and accountable. And it's a key quality of self-management. Now, this might still be mad at that person, right? But they're at least trying to reestablish trust, because how do you trust someone who missed the deadline? But not hiding it is a step towards that transparency. So now this itself was not directly measured by any of the assessments you took, but you can make a correlation that someone high in cognitive appraisal, as example, they're probably going to respond to emotionally thoughtfully have them basically be thoughtful of their emotions in a situation. And this can help people see them as consistent and trustworthy, right? When we have we don't act on impulse, we act on intention, and that consistency is part of that trustworthiness, right? So predictable and consistency in behavior, when it's good behavior, let's underline that, when it's good behavior impacts how trustworthy people see you as. Let's talk about the third skill. We're on adaptability. I love that you guys are chatting in the chat, so you can definitely feel free to shoot your anecdotes or your thoughts and make those connections together. Again, another skill that you might not think to be relevant to self-management, but it's about being flexible when facing change and uncertainty. So this means adjusting your response and your plans as circumstances evolve, and then kind of being comfortable with that, the ambiguity in those setbacks. And it's an interesting one for me because I tend to be really flexible. Like, I don't love when Zoom crashes, right? But I'm like problem solving it. I can get in, gives me a little bit of stress. So I'm not always flexible, right? Because I still have that emotional reaction to it, right? But I can still fix it, right? So I guess let me give another example. Someone that's high adaptability, I am going to pull in some like family examples as I go too, because, we're applying this, hopefully to our workplaces and our work relationships, but really this whole topic extends beyond work, right? This is how we deal with friends and family in the community. So someone who's highly adaptable, this is very stressful, but someone who's adaptable, if your child's daycare closes unexpectedly, which would be really rare, there'd have to be something like a lice outbreak probably to do that. But this would be someone who calmly adjusts their plans and finds a backup, but then also stays positive during that experience, right? Because if we're adjusting our plans and finding a backup, but we're stressed out the whole time, well, then we're obviously still acting somewhat on that impulse instead of intention, right? So low adaptability, same situation, but you get frustrated, you struggle to adjust, you stress, your stress spills over to your child, right? Because they're witnessing that, they're experiencing that in you. For those who took the CDR, the Connor Davidson resilience scale, this measured your personal resilience. So how well you bounce back and adapt to changes and stay flexible under that pressure. So if you scored high, it suggests that you're able to adapt effectively when things need to change and when things change unexpectedly. If you scored, on the other hand, if someone with lower scores, you probably struggle to adapt to change. So you often can feel overwhelmed by and have trouble adjusting when there's like slow progress or no progress in something. Those that took the perceived stress scale, this one was looking at how much stress you feel in your daily life. So that was about day-to-day moments, right? So if you scored lower on that, it suggests that even when unexpected changes occur, so this was like, if you scored lower on that one, that was good, okay, not higher, because again, they all measure differently. So if you scored lower on that one, then you're probably someone who can stay calm, you can prioritize and adjust your approach, keeping that positivity. These are all key aspects of adaptability. On the other hand, someone who scored high on that perceived stress scale, you probably find all of that a little more challenging. You feel stressed, you feel flustered, making it harder to respond effectively because you're possibly low in adaptability. Now, if you took Clifton Strengths, adaptability is one of those. I'm talking about the personality assessments we took. You took Clifton Strengths, adaptability is actually one of those 34 talents, and it's kind of peeking into this exact skill right here. If you took Myers-Briggs, or the 16 personalities, perceiver, the P instead of the J, that tends to be insight into your adaptability as well. So people with the P tend to be more adaptable. People with the J tend to be a little more flustered with change. And if you have any questions as I'm going, I see some in the chat. Let's see. Generally speaking, when emotions are suppressed, does that often cause us to feel as if we are being attacked, especially when trying to converse about EI with someone? So emotions are being suppressed. Does that often, who's suppressing the emotions? Oh, okay. I don't know if you, I don't know that there's a correlation between suppressing emotions and feeling attacked by feedback, or let's say it's even criticism. I think, because I would say I don't suppress my emotions, but instead I'm very like in tune with them and very reactive, right? And so I feel attacked with, feedback. It's not a healthy thing. I'm not trying to like look like a terrible person, but there's just some realities in there. Let's talk about, oh, what's so funny? I kept thinking we talked about optimism and pessimism last week. We didn't. We're talking about it this week. I forgot that slide was here. I think because I made this PowerPoint last week, I thought it was last week. So let's talk about optimism versus pessimism, because this is a huge thing I've mentioned multiple times, right? Now, this is kind of a mental lens that shapes your self-management, whether you lean towards optimism or lean towards pessimism. So it's kind of a detour from the skills we've been looking at. But I have it here because it closely ties to adaptability, which I just covered. And I've mentioned this slide several times, thinking we had talked about it last week. So if you believe challenges are manageable, you're more likely to shift strategies and keep going, right? You're more likely to adapt. That's under the perception that you can handle it, right? This idea of optimism and pessimism also connects to motivation. So how you interpret experiences affects your drive to take initiative, pursue your goals. And we're going to talk about achievement and motivation like on the next slide, right? So let's clarify these two terms though. Optimism is not just blind positivity or like being a naive cheerleader, right? It's just the belief that challenges or like temporary setbacks, that they're solvable, right? Optimistic people expect good outcomes, and they see setbacks as something, just temporary, essentially. Something they see setbacks as just something to overcome. So I don't know where you feel like you're in this camp. Now, a lot of those assessments, not all of them. Well, let me see. 1, 2, 3, 8. No, all 8 of them on some level measured your optimism versus your pessimism scale, right? So pessimism, on the other hand, tends to view setbacks as permanent, as life-changing, as personal, as pervasive. They're convinced, as someone who's like highly pessimistic is convinced the problems won't change. Maybe the fault lies in them, or sometimes the fault's fully in the other person. But basically, it's never going to change. It's not even worth trying, right? And so I think we're all thinking, and that pessimism, I don't want to confuse with logic, right? Because it's still an emotional reaction. It's not stepping away from emotions. It's just how we're emotionally wired, right? So the key, though, is a balanced mindset. We don't want to ignore negative emotions, but learning to challenge those negative interpretations and create realistic and empowering alternatives, that's what we're really balancing for. And we don't want to just be fully optimistic either, right? There's a groundedness and a reality that we also have to take into effect. So we're not the naive cheerleader. So by the way, with the Clifton Strength stuff, I have positivity and connectedness, and we didn't get into the theory of it, but there are barrier labels or weaknesses, or however you want to call the term, to all these talents. And of the only 2 in the entire 34 where they say that the weakness might be naive are with this person with positivity might be naive. This person with connectedness might be naive. So I have both of the 2 naive strengths, apparently. But yeah, so I can live in cloud 9 so much that I'm forgetting about the checking into reality, right? Or looking at it critically. So where you fall with this optimism and pessimism really strongly influences how you respond to stress, how you're going to respond to setbacks, how you respond to feedback. And these are all crucial parts of self-management. And the good news, again, is that this is a skill you can develop and strengthen over time. It's not a fixed personality trait. Now, when we talked about personality, it's a huge thing for me. Some of you have natural, like a natural home in optimism, maybe a natural home in pessimism. And like you've really, as an optimistic person, ironed out how to see. There's a quote that I love, which is, there's always flowers for those who want to see them. So I equate that with positivity a lot. So someone with an optimistic mindset, that's maybe where you gravitate. Someone with a pessimistic mindset, we've trained ourselves also long-term to have these mindsets. So that's why they fit into the personality trait theory. But the reality is it's not a fixed thing. You find yourself more on the pessimism side, we can find the middle. If you're too optimistic, we can find the middle. So several of the assessments, like I said, relate to optimism versus pessimism and kind of having that balanced mindset of self-management. I'm going to spare us from going into each of those assessments and how they relate to it. I took some notes on that, but just for time's sake, I feel like I'm talking a lot. I guess that's the nature of a lecture-based class. Let's go to skill 4. So we took a detour. We went over skill 1, which was emotional self-control. Skill 2, which was transparency. Skill 3, which was adaptability. Then we took a detour to talk about pessimism and optimism, because it fits really well into discussions of stress and how we respond to change. But again, those mindsets also play a role in skill 4, which is being the achievement orientation. So this is kind of like it's pretty self-explanatory. It's the drive to improve performance and meet, high standards, right? So setting challenging goals, working persistently to do better. People that are really strong in achievement orientation or have that as a skill, they tend to take initiative without even being asked to, right? They stay really focused on their results, even if there are setbacks. So they're always striving for personal and professional growth. Now, if you took the 16 personalities and it gave you, ENFP or ISTJ, gave you one of those, but it also had a 5th letter, whether you were T for turbulent or A for assertive. And the turbulent personalities, which if you go read over that, if you were a T like I am, you're going to read over that and think you sound like what's the word I want? Neurotic. Because these people are constantly thinking, how can I do better? I'm not good at, there's a message of they're constantly thinking about, oh, I can do better next time. I didn't do great that time. So there's a lot of self-criticism in there. But what there is also in that turbulent personality is this a strive to be better. The strive knowing that we can always be better. I can improve. I want to improve. Someone who is high in achievement orientation, they're usually really good at setting clear goals for themselves, and like consistently working towards them. They create a plan like to finish a big project, right? And they follow through step by step until it's completed. Obviously, if you have low adaptability and high stress, going step by step until it's completed, obviously we can bail on our goals at that point, right? Because these emotions are getting in the way for us. If you're a low achievement orientation, then you probably struggle to stay focused or struggle to stay motivated. So you might start a project with a lot of enthusiasm, but you kind of lose momentum and you never actually finish it. Now, the three assessments that you took that would relate to this, there's the grit scale. And grit is like such a buzzword right now, right? Everyone's talking about grit. Now, this is looking at perseverance and passion for long-term goals. So if you scored high on the grit scale, so that would be one I would for sure encourage you guys to go back and take. If you scored high, then it was suggesting you have a tendency to stay focused and motivated even when challenging things arise. So you, like if you're high, like an example, if you're someone who commits to establishing like a daily reading schedule with your routine, and you can, or I'm sorry, you're like, if you schedule a daily reading, like time with your child, like you consistently stay with it, right? Because it's goal oriented. I know what I want to do. Reading to my child's good, and I'm really consistent on that follow through. So on the other hand, though, someone with like lower scores probably starts projects, like I said, with a lot of enthusiasm, but then struggles to maintain effort over time, losing momentum before it's finishing. So yeah, I'm going to start reading to my child every night, and stuff got so chaotic, I'm going to drop that project, right? I'm calling it a project. Your children, they're miniature projects, right? But we lose the momentum to keep up with the routine. Now, earlier I said that think about the 16 personalities. Like most of you took that one. If you had a P perceiving, you probably are really high in the skill of adaptability. And those that are high in judging are probably, adaptability is not like natural to you all the time, right? Maybe you've learned skills to be adaptable, but you would prefer nothing to go wrong. Of course, all of us would. Okay, if you were a J though, achievement orientation is usually very high for you. So achievement orientation is not just the desire to be better, it is part of that. I would say even perceivers desire, I want to be a better version of myself. I want routine, want to get good at this. J's are the ones who usually can actually commit to it. You're really disciplined. You're really good at usually breaking a task down into smaller elements to get it completed. So it keeps you moving on it. So while adaptability might be lower, you're typically higher in this scale, in this skill. What other assessments? COPE, the brief COPE. This one was looking at how you were handling challenges, especially whether you use like task-oriented coping strategies. So high task-oriented coping strategies, like, and also our J's, our judgers, right, are high task-oriented people. This obviously supports achievement orientation mindset by helping you tackle problems directly and staying productive. Someone relying conversely on avoidance coping probably procrastinates, probably gets overwhelmed, and it's reducing the likelihood of them meeting their goal. That's where I fall. Beautiful thing. Sometimes I'm so good. Sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I haven't done this in 2 weeks. The positive negative affect scale, we just talked about positive or pessimism and optimism. So that's embedded in there. They were looking at your general emotional tendencies. So high positive affect can boost achievement orientation because it fuels motivation and it fuels like persistence, right? Those who have high negative affect, so let's say high pessimism, your motivation gets zapped. It makes it harder to follow through. That's kind of what's happening there. So you can start seeing how these skills start, you don't just need one skill, you can see how they start working together. If you have low, I guess in summary for this page, if you have low grit or tend to use avoidance coping, you probably struggle to maintain the drive needed to pursue and achieving your long-term goals. Initiative. This is our fifth and final skill, right? I have quite a few slides left. Not a ton, it's not gonna take us a long time, but I'm like timing this out, right? So initiative, this is your readiness to act on opportunities without being told to do so. So typically those high in achievement orientation and high in emotional regulation and high in all adaptability tend to be able to do the initiative side, right? So they're all working together. We obviously want to start with skill one and build up to these things. But this is basically, you being proactive without being told, you taking the lead when needed, you stepping up to solve problems on your own, not something a lot of my freshmen in my English comp course do. Need a lot of handholding. I got to get them. Maybe I should teach this curriculum. So people that are strong in the initiative skill they take responsibility and they seize chances to make things happen, usually before they're even asked. I guess a workplace example, someone notices tension. So high initiative, how would that look at work? Someone notices tension building, like in a team meeting, and steps in to address it constructively, kind of maybe suggesting a solution or facilitating a conversation before the situation escalates. So they're not going to wait to be asked. They're going to be proactive to improve the emotional climate. Someone low in initiative, you notice the same tension, but maybe you stay silent. I'm going to avoid involvement. They might hope someone else will address it. Basically missing the opportunity to influence the situation positively and support the team's emotional well-being. That is obviously a very simple example to give, but it's, got a lot of layers to it. Because what if the tension is between your bosses? Maybe you're not the right person to step in, but there's a good example of what it looks like to take initiative versus sit aside. So if you took the grit scale, we just talked about that a minute ago, that was looking at perseverance and your passion for these long-term goals. High scores, again, suggest that maybe you have a strong achievement orientation, but also that you are probably strong in initiative because you're willing to start tasks and keep going even when progress is slow or even when problems pop up, right? If you were low in the grit scale, again, probably low in achievement orientation as well, but also you probably are more likely to be hesitant to take on anything or lack follow through. You're going to miss opportunities to act on ideas because, low initiative. Now, one thing I don't think we talked about yet was the self-compassion. And this one kind of fits an initiative the best. The self-compassion assessment, so remember there were like 9 assessments you could take. I don't know which ones you guys took. This one was looking at how kind and understanding you are towards yourself, especially during setbacks. So if you scored high in self-compassion, it suggests that you're probably more likely to take initiative because you can move forward without being paralyzed by self-criticism. After a project doesn't go well, you reflect on what you can improve and proactively start a new approach instead of getting discouraged from it. On the other hand, if you were lower in self-compassion, you probably I bet self-criticism or failure or fear probably holds you back, and that can really make it hard to take this first step to do challenges. Definitely. I'm getting chatted, or I see a bunch of chats coming in. That's funny. Okay, so those were our 5 skills. Now, as we've worked through these areas, like plus the pessimism and optimism discussion, I do want you to take a moment to reflect on like what stood out as a strength to you. Were any one of these 5, 6 items something that you're like, yeah, I tend to thrive well in this camp, right? What areas do you feel like you can improve on? And I guess just to remind you as you're quickly noting those areas for yourself that any of these things can be developed over time. Identify where you're strong and where you can grow. Like those are some of the first steps. And if you think back to self-awareness last week, that was an entire skill dedicated to self-awareness, was understanding your strengths and weaknesses. So we want to zero in on that. One thing I like to do, and you'll see this with each of our domains, is talk about what does it look like in the wild. So what what does it look like when you observe someone with low self-management? What is it we're seeing in people? What are people doing that can give me clues into the fact that maybe they're low in self-management? So they're all pretty obvious. One of the obvious things though is that you're going to see a lot of emotional reactivity, a lot of mood swings. So things like outbursts or impulsive comments, maybe even just, I'm thinking of other people, maybe just shutting down completely when they're overwhelmed. And basically it's a breakdown of the emotional self-control skill number one in self-management, right? That's what it looks like when it breaks down. Under stress, self-management, falters in areas like adaptability. So they look very frustrated when change happens. Or also the skill of achievement orientation. So we see procrastination, avoidance, or disorganization, and that kind of prevents that goal completion. So maybe you're thinking of people you work with, maybe you're thinking of yourself, maybe you're thinking of a child, you're like I have a couple young teenagers that I'm like, I see some of these things in them. Another thing about these people with low self-management, so someone may know what they need to do, but struggle to follow through, especially when their emotions are running high. So you'll see a negative reactivity to feedback. You'll see their defensiveness, maybe resistance to new ideas. And then this kind of also affects that skill of trustworthiness and transparency, right? And then you'll also see that lack of skill of taking initiative. So they're not going to step up to solve problems. They're not going to step up to opportunities, right? And that's kind of part of that withdrawing and being detached type of a thing. You're probably going to see a lot of impulsivity, right? So like I said, interrupting others, acting without thinking, saying something they should definitely later regret. And if they have low self-awareness, they don't even know they should regret it. If they have at least some self-awareness, but no emotional control, right? They're going to say the thing they regret, but they're going to be aware that maybe I shouldn't have said that. But typically these people also have a lot of negative self-talk, which in turn we saw drains initiative, it drains motivation. Their performance is going to suffer, their deadlines are missed. And those are things we're seeing happen when you have low self-management. It's not that they lack the skill to be properly self-managed, because we talked about it. It's something you can learn, but they're struggling to effectively use the 5 self-management skills in real time. And I guess if we're all honest with ourselves, we could probably think of moments in our lives where we lacked any of these skills, right? It's just about consistency over time, which comes back into that trustworthiness, right? So what I just shared with you might have looked familiar because when I explored the self-awareness domain last week, we saw some of those things as well. But I wanted to emphasize that there are important differences between self-awareness and self-management. So if you took one of those emotional intelligence assessments back in week 1 that shared these 4 domains, you might be low in one of these, but not the other. And that distinction really does matter because it's different patterns of behavior. If you're high in self-awareness, but low in self-management, we're going to see different behavior from someone who's maybe low in self-awareness. And it's kind of hard to be high in self-management when you're low in self-awareness. So, but someone with low self-awareness, they're going to struggle to express their feelings. They're going to speak very vaguely, or even in a contradictory way about their emotions, right? Because they haven't zeroed in on how to actually name their emotion. That was a huge component of self-awareness. On the other hand, someone who's low in self-management might be very good at, let's say they're low in self-management, but high in self-awareness. They're going to be very good at identifying and expressing their emotions, but they're going to do it with impulsivity and intensity, defensiveness, and often usually regret how they handled the situation. So there's a difference when we're missing one of these domains. A person low in self-awareness might not understand feedback altogether, saying things like, I don't see the problem, right? As part of self-awareness is being honest with your strengths and weaknesses. If we don't see our weaknesses, then feedback maybe just goes over our head. But someone low in self-management may accept the feedback, but still say, I know I just can't stop doing it, right? We're stuck on impulse instead of intention. Someone low in self-awareness might feel overwhelmed and not know why. because they're confused or unclear about like what they're actually feeling, right? They have no idea what emotion it is. They're not naming the emotion. But someone who's low in self-management might know exactly what they're feeling. You know, I'm mad, but they're still going to act in ways they later regret because the emotion's taking over them. So I guess that, like, put it simply, and I'm sorry, I'm not keeping up with the chat. I'll definitely circle back to it at the end if there were questions in there. But someone low in self-awareness, basically being low in self-awareness is not knowing what you're feeling or why. It's kind of, I saw this analogy online about driving and with comparing low self-awareness and low self-management. So low self-awareness is, I think I just said low self-management, low self-management. So low self-awareness is like driving without a map or a GPS. You're lost, but you don't know where and why, right? Like, I have emotions, but I can't even name them. I can't even identify them. Low self-management is knowing exactly what you're feeling, but reacting in ways that work against your goals. So it's like driving and having a map, but no control over the steering wheel. You know where you are, but you can't stop yourself from veering off course. And I don't know who created that little analogy there, but I just love it. I think it's perfect. I'm curious, can you have low self-awareness but high self-management? And I was hesitant to say this earlier because like, can you be low in self-awareness, which is the domain we talked about last week, and high in self-management? And the thing is, it's like, it's not really, I mean, partially, but like in certain ways, right? So according to emotional intelligence, self-awareness is the foundation for self-management, right? Because you can't manage what you don't recognize. So in general, low self-awareness usually means low self-management, or the inability to self-manage effectively. There's some nuances here, right? On how we look at this. So you might, this is an interesting thought. So you might appear to have high self-management while lacking deep self-awareness if you follow very strict routines and coping systems without truly understanding your emotions, right? So on the surface, you've got routines, you look consistent in your behavior, but you're not understanding, maybe you're ignoring the emotions behind it. Maybe you're someone who's highly disciplined, so you're organized, you're on time, and you're calm. This looks like high self-management, right? But it's not high self-management in an emotional intelligence sense. It's just being self-managed in operating as a human, like, you know, that has a job with your responsibility sense. It's different from emotional intelligence, because just because you are calm and you are organized doesn't mean you know why you feel what you feel. Someone who suppresses their emotions, especially in professional environments, looks like they're highly self-managed, right? It looks like good regulation, but it isn't always healthy, and it's definitely not always sustainable. So, you know, if you look like someone who's high in self-management and low in self-awareness, you know, that we see a lot of emotional suppression, burnout over time for not stopping to identify the emotion, struggles in relationship with others. So even if you think someone's high in self-management, but they have terrible relationships or terrible at keeping relationships, that's a good sign that it's not emotionally intelligent self-management. You know, we do always want to stop and ask yourself what causes low self-management. If you identified a skill there that was maybe one that you struggle with, or you're thinking of someone around you who really struggles in this area, you know, there's a lot that can lead to why someone's self-management is low, right? Internal and external forces. So it goes deeper than just being, oh, you're disorganized and you're impulsive. For many people, it actually stems from like chronic stress, past trauma, and this stuff overloads the brain on so many times that, you know, you've trained your brain not to regulate emotions. Some of us never learned the skill growing up, right? How to name our feeling, or, you know, how to respond when we feel something, how to identify and express those feelings. I didn't grow up in a home like that, you know, so it's just funny because I didn't, you know, but yeah, I would say that had some implications on my vocabulary around emotions. Negative experiences, negative past experience, you know, can lead to avoidance, or, you know, negative past experience can lead to avoidance of tasks, but it can also lead to perfectionism. So having a fear of failure can lead to be, swinging the other way and now just needing to be a perfectionist. Let's see here. Basically, when someone has low self-worth, it's just harder to believe they find it harder to believe they can manage challenges. So it causes a lot of self-doubt, a lot of perfectionism, a lot of avoidance. This all can lead to really dysfunctional habits like procrastination or just giving up easy or being, too perfectionist. So, and then also, I guess I have the item in here, your environmental pressure. Working or living in a high pressure space can make even those that are really good at self-management skills, it can make it really hard to use them, right? So we have to look at the daily environment we're also in. So it's not just a lack of willpower. Like if you know someone who's low in self-management or you see a skill here that you're struggling in, I wouldn't say naturally be inclined to think it's a lack of trying. It's often the result of like deeper emotional or contextual barriers in there. The sun is kind of going down and I don't have the lights on in here, so I'm getting darker and darker. Okay, so for those who know someone who maybe struggles in this area, how do you manage people who have low self-management skills, right? Somebody's procrastinating or checking out or giving up. How do you collaborate or work with these people? How do you live with them if it's your spouse, right? And the first thing, and you're going to see this list kind of pop up each domain. It modifies a little bit as we go, but a lot of it's the same. But the first is to lead with empathy. Their shutdowns, their outbursts, their mood swings, their impulsiveness, it's probably very frustrating to be around that, but they're often signs of like an emotional dysregulation, right? They're not necessarily personal attacks. That doesn't mean you excuse the behavior, but it does mean you see the human behind it, which we just discussed that, the human aspect of it on the last slide, that it's, emotional and it's contextual. There's something tied to it. Don't take it personally. Their reaction is often about that person's capacity in the moment, not your value. No, it's not about you most of the time, right? So you need to stay calm to help de-escalate things. You're also, advised to set boundaries. Boundaries aren't punishments to people. They're protective, right? You can say something like, okay, let's pause and come back to this when we're both calmer. Also, I have this line here about modeling self-regulation, and you'll hear this come up repeatedly in this course, that emotional intelligence is relatively contagious. So when you stay grounded, when you're highly self-managed, right, and in control, acting on intention instead of impulse, you invite others to do the same. So we can often train that skill in others by modeling it ourselves, circling back to being trustworthy or transparent, right? The last item I would say is just know when to step back. If the behavior becomes harmful or overwhelming, obviously protect your own emotional well-being, because you are also, if you surround yourself with people who are low emotional intelligence, you're going to pick up those lack of skills as well, right? It's kind of that classic, we are who our friends are. So step away if you need to, seek support, focus on what you can actually control. There's the saying, you can't control how others feel, but you can choose how you respond to them. And that's your self-management at work, even in tough interactions with people. Okay, what do we got? What's the class go to? 6:45. So we technically have 20 minutes. I'm glad I recorded this because I would find it really hard to sit here for an hour and 15 minutes just to hear someone talk straight through. So, if you need to step away, of course, you need to do that. I've got a couple more slides here, but really the focus at this point is how do we grow in our emotional intelligence? How can we grow specifically in self-management? So, as I've emphasized, it starts with self-awareness, right? Understanding how we feel, how you're going to react, how you're going to behave in different situations. So recognizing your own tendencies, like whether you're someone who gets frustrated easily, whether you're someone who avoids challenges, whether you struggle to follow through, right? And you personally, when we're talking about self-awareness, but just you as a person, it's a good window. The personality side of it is really a good window to start seeing into some of these tendencies. Some people naturally stay calm under stress, while others need to practice more emotional control more intentionally, right? So the key is really noticing patterns so you can develop strategies to strengthen that self-management over time. Basically, so I'm trying to think what I did with these resources. They're online. I do want to show you. These resources. So each thing can be a skill, a positive, working towards your success in this area. But when we talk about your personality traits, right, each of these can be something that creates an opportunity for you to grow in self-management. But each of your personality traits, when you took those assessments 2 weeks ago, can also be a window into maybe a potential blind spot. So last week, I had curated for you 3 documents that had to do with each of the 3 assessments that you were able to take for the class. And it had to do with how that particular trait, right, related to self-awareness, how it created a path to grow in it, and also maybe a path that you would be blind, a little walking blindly in, right? Not seeing how that skill, how that talent, how that trait negatively influenced your ability to be high in self-awareness. So this week I've done the same thing. I have 3 documents for you, one for each of these personality assessments to see how each of those talents might align with positive steps you can take in self-management, but also how it might be creating blind spots for you as well. So when we want to grow in self-management, the main thing to start with is you. Go back to self-awareness and think through, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Now there's several documents for you this week. Another one that I've made is, let's see if I can pull it up real quick, is this practical tools for self-improvement. So we can't go into detail on this because do you guys see the document, by the way? It's Sarah. Whose face can I see? A couple of you. Brittany. Yeah, there we go. Can't go into detail. This is a list of practical activities you can use to improve your self-management skills. They're really simple practices you can build into your daily life, kind of like as mini micro routines. Most of them focus on emotional regulation, which ties into emotional self-control. Others focus on the optimistic mindset. How do we grow as more towards the optimistic rather than pessimistic side? And then quite a few of these also relate to the achievement orientation skill. But what I want to show you is you have access to this in our course shell. What I want to show you also is basically a breakdown of some of those areas. So most of this is detailed a little more on the handout, not all of it, because I think I don't think I need to detail, get more sleep on the handout, where some of these are intuitive, but so you're going to find some additional items on here. But a good place to start when we look at, let's say it's 7:30. I don't know if I should go through all these. Good place to start, obviously, at the top is with your self-awareness. And something tangible you can do there are the emotional check-ins we've actually already been doing this semester, right? Other things like keeping a mood journal, keeping track of your emotions, identifying your triggers, noticing your patterns. Those are great. It's a great base to start with. Practice emotional regulation. Use mindfulness techniques like deep breathing, brief body scans. Both of those items are on the other document that you have access to. Set clear goals and set priorities. Break your bigger goals down into manageable steps. Consider using that SMART goal framework, right? So how do we keep ourselves achievement oriented during this process? Another thing you should intentionally do with self-management to grow in self-management is to practice cognitive reframing, right? So challenging negative self-talk and shifting your mindset from reaction to reflection. So trying to view challenges as opportunities rather than as obstacles. The rest of these, trying to think if I want to develop healthy habits. Obviously, we want good sleep, regular exercise. We talked about the relationship between the body and the mind and our emotions, I think in week 1, right? Setting plans, building resilience. And one way to do that is to reflect on past successes and practice gratitude journaling. And if you downloaded that Finch app I presented you in the first week, it actually has you walk through gratitude journaling every couple of days. But some of those things, the gratitude stuff is also in the daily document that I gave, or in the document I gave you. Finally, seek feedback and support. I told you we'd hear this a couple of times, but the emotional intelligence journey isn't like a solo event, especially when we get to the next domains. They involve people. Ask trusted people how you handle stress or difficult situations, and be open to the feedback, be open to adjusting your approach, right? But partnering with someone for accountability can also keep you, on track. And we know that being around emotionally intelligent people can also improve your own emotional intelligence. So practice some of these tools regularly, and you can strengthen your self-management. But I broke it down even further, and because we're short on time, I'm not going to spend a lot on it because you have access to these PowerPoint slides in our course shell. So if you haven't been in our course shell yet, please log in. Let me know if you're having issues. But basically, each of the assessments that you took, so there were these 8 assessments. I'm going to hop screens real quick. Here are these assessments that you had options to take. And if you took one and you scored in a less than ideal way on that assessment, so I can't say scored high or low, because remember they score differently. But if you scored in a way that you didn't want to score on that assessment, here are specific action items you can take to improve that specific thing that assessment was targeting, right? So if we are high in negative affect, we can practice grounding techniques, deep breathing, mindfulness practices, and these things will help retrain your brain, which I have a slide on in a second. When we did this self-awareness, I'm going to speed through a couple of these last slides just so we make it in time. When we did this self-awareness activity last week, this is called the trigger mapping exercise. I had mentioned then that it was also a preview of this week. So I wanted to bring this up again because what we really focused on today was the behavior and alternative response aspects of this exercise. Last week, when we went through this whole thing, when we were doing self-awareness, we were really working on that automatic thought and emotion breakdown. And you may have also given thought to what was my behavior and what could my other response have been. So we were reflecting on the behavior, what it was we did, and then evaluating what it was we should do. And this exercise is basically a self-management reflective exercise, right? So it's still very useful to you as a tool. Same with this impulse versus intention type of moment thinking, right? Now, all these tools are really great. Many of them involve reflection after the fact, right? Or many of them some of them involve pre-planning. But the reality is that we can't really pre-plan all these tense moments in our lives because a lot of the stuff just kind of hits us out of the blue. And our self-management, mine included, may be so low that there's no time to pre-plan for what my reaction is going to be. So you have to instead make time for reflection after the fact. And over time, those exercises are going to lead to better impulse control. But if you're like me and you are stuck at impulse, right? Because most of the time I'm stuck at impulse. I wanted to give you a few quick calm down strategies that can help you reset yourself in a moment so you can act on intention in that moment instead. So you're going to find these also on that. I have a separate document for you in our course shell here's this, I call it instruction sheets, but box breathing, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique, name it, tame it, shake it out, stretch, get up and walk, self-kindness reminder. These instructions are kind of broken down on this document. I'll just pull it up because I can. But if you're someone like me, like I said, that's kind of stuck on impulse most of the time, here's a great starting place. I gave you a lot of advice today and a lot of techniques. And the reality is it's hard to build those all in. Sometimes we have to pick 1 or 2, right, things to start with. Let's go back and see where we're at. There we go. This is one of the things I want to talk about. Yay, I think we're going to finish in time. This is great. So I wanted to briefly remind you, again, self-management is not a skill, or is a skill, right? It's a skill, not a trait. And it's not something you either have or don't have. It's something you can actually choose to practice and improve over time. But I've stressed this since week 1. Emotional regulation, emotional intelligence is very deeply connected to the brain. When we talk about strengthening self-management, we're actually talking about how to learn to guide and retrain your brain. So just sharing a couple concepts that connect to the brain. There's so much more than this, but just some easy to digest ones. We've got this like amygdala hijack. So and this is by Goleman, by our emotional intelligence guy, but he used this phrase to describe what happens when your emotional brain takes over before the rational brain has a chance to respond. And that's why in a heated moment, we might snap, or we're going to overreact, or maybe we'll shut down, because the amygdala bypasses logical thinking and pushes us straight into this fight or flight or completely freeze stage, right? So we're tracking all this with brain scans. We're seeing all this play out in research, but we get that idea there. So we also have the prefrontal cortex also comes in next, right? So this is the part of the brain right behind your forehead, and it acts like your control center. It's what helps us hit pause. It's what helps you regulate your impulses. It is what helps you apply the emotional strategies that you are going to start practicing that I've detailed out for you this week on those documents. So the stronger your prefrontal cortex is in these moments, the more likely you are going to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively in future events, right? Because we're retraining our brain. We're training what parts we want to take over. One last thing to make about the brain is that it has the ability to change, right? We can heal it, we can rewire it. There's research on this mindfulness and this neuroplasticity. It shows that the more we practice, the more emotional regulation, the more we can literally rewire our brain patterns. And over time, it becomes easier and more natural to stay calm and reframe and take a breath and respond with that control. So this isn't just about willpower. This is about, training your brain and realizing we're not doing something pseudo here. This is something we can connect physically back to your body. Remember, awareness comes before self-control. Can't manage what you don't notice. So we need to notice first, and then we can take these steps to manage. At its core, self-management is about responding rather than reacting, and a healthy response rather than like an impulsive reacting, right? So emotional regulation is really what underpins leadership, resilience, and integrity. And research shows that it's directly linked to leadership effectiveness. It's directly linked to stress resilience, and it's linked to healthy relationships in general. So I guess as you're moving forward, keep asking yourself, what emotion am I feeling, and what response best aligns with the person or the leader I want to be. Just the assignments for the week. Can you guys still hear me okay? I got a notice on this computer saying my audio might be affected. Let me see. Who can I see? I can see Brittany. I got a thumbs up. Okay, thank you. I don't know why every computer I use here at work is just shuts down on me. Okay, for the assignments this week, remember, they're not meant to stress you out. So if you're behind, just contact me. You just need to get a certain amount of points to earn the credit for the course, right? But we have our journal, which again, you just mark as complete whenever you've done that on your own this week. And we also have a social awareness and empathy assessment, because we're going into social awareness next week, and we need to, we're going to be talking a lot about empathy. So that's going to be in social awareness. For your journal, just a prompt for yourself: how do people experience your self-management? What do you want to improve? What triggers low self-management in this skill? There's just a whole prompt online that's optional if you want to respond to it, to what I've given you, or journal about whatever you want. It's 7:41. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up and pause for questions.